and welcome to GeogLive 25. Tonight we're looking at volcanoes and earthquakes. Okay, thank you, Anthony. So this is our sequence for this evening. I am not Julia Tanner, although Julia is here. I'm Kate Glanville, and I'll be doing the chairing this evening. We also have Dr. Tessa Willey with us to talk about Primary Geography Journal. Sally and Jen will be talking about volcanology and how they've incorporated that into their curriculum. And then Denise Freeman will be looking at the value of primary-secondary collaboration. And we have the GeogLive team supporting as well. And as Steve has put in the chat, please do comment in the chat, tell us where you're from. If you have any questions, please post them there and we will be answering those throughout, and if we have any time at the end as well. We are recording, and the session will be posted onto YouTube later, where you can also find a range of other GeogLives. If you could keep your cameras off until the Q&A, that would be really helpful, unless you are presenting a course. And if you could mute as well, just so we reduce any background noise, please. We do have an X and a Blue Sky account, which are on the screen at the moment. So please do feel free to comment or talk to us there as well. And please do remember that our contributors are sharing their ideas and their work freely with us this afternoon. But if you are using it, please do acknowledge where you're getting that from. So please do acknowledge the source. And the copyright resides with the EYPPC and the individual contributors who are contributing tonight. Just a reminder about the Geographical Association conference this year, 15th and 17th of April at Oxford Brookes University. You can sign up for that on the GA site at the moment. We have a lot of primary content which has been highlighted on the Wednesday and the Thursday, so lots of different sessions that you might be interested in, lots of useful ideas to take back to your classrooms as well. So if you can join us, please do. The Wednesday in particular has got lots of primary content, but the whole conference will be really useful for meeting other primary geographers and getting some ideas as well. And we've also got the National Festival of Fieldwork coming up in June. We have done GeogLives about fieldwork in the past, which you can find on YouTube. So please do have a look for GeogLives 2, 5, 8 and 9, which have all talked about fieldwork, and the whole range of GeogLives, which you can find on YouTube, which have got a whole range of different ideas for you as well. And over to you, Anthony, to talk about GeogPod.
So GeogPod is something else that the GA produces. We're now up to GeogPod 89, and there's various colleagues who've spoken on this in the past. Jess Hills talked about championing primary geography, and I've talked about in the last week, it dropped on Friday, shared experiences, focusing particularly on primary geography inquiry and aspects of how to build your local area capacity and agency with your teachers and your children. So do have a listen. I'd love to get into a conversation or a debate about the sorts of things that I said in that hour's conversation.
Thank you, Anthony. And just a reminder about some of our previous GeogLives. So we've had them on teaching place, weather and climate, rivers, and a whole range of other topics. We had our last one, GeogLive 24, was on maps and mapping. So we've had a whole mixture of different ideas. And over to Tess to talk about primary geography. Thanks, Tess.
Brilliant, thank you, and thanks everyone. Thanks Kate, and thanks everyone for being here this evening. It's great to see everyone. I'm the chair of the Primary Geography Editorial Board. I have that privilege of doing that, and we just wanted to flag up this latest issue of the journal, and it's focused on the geography of togetherness. It's been brilliantly put together by one of the members of the board, Ben Ballin, who we're actually really sad to be losing as an editor on the board, but who will remain, we know, a close friend and a corresponding member, and just what a legacy he's left through this amazing edition for this term. So there's lots around togetherness, cohesion and collaboration, and I think it's just what we need in these sort of times of fragmentation and discord. So a huge thanks to Ben and to the team for the perfect antidote, I think, to what is going on around us. And I'm just going to mention here today just a little taster really of some of the articles that we've got. One of them focusing on community cohesion from Ben and Paula Owens, and they invite looking at issues around cohesion in the community, and they invite feedback as they consider ideas of the importance of a need for better and more cohesion in our community, and what role children can play in doing that through their geography learning. In a further article, Jess Hill investigates and explains how the children in her class shared this passion for Antarctica, and it brought them together and motivated them to form this geography club through which they developed that passion of that place, and of course lots of aspects of geography. And just to add that Ofsted were really impressed. They came in to some of the sessions that they were doing, and it really impacted their deep dive on geography. So geography really did develop through that, which is brilliant. There are lots of articles in the edition on distant localities and strong connections despite physical distance, seen through this lens of togetherness. And commonality, I think, and connections always seem to prove stronger than difference and fragmentation. And it's helping the children to recognise and celebrate that. Trees also feature strongly, and in this case with the tragic example of the Sycamore Gap, where the terrible actions of some ruined a unique setting for countless others. But as Steve Rawlinson, who's here tonight, explained, seeds of unbounded hope have sprung from this already, with numerous different projects, and saplings are growing and different futures are being envisaged and enabled. So with the positive coming through from something that seems very negative. And final article that we're focusing on here is understanding our world through geography, and its many complexities can help us to come to a place of peace, as Jackie Zammit explores so well in her article, Geography for Peace. There are loads and loads of other articles in this amazing edition for you to explore, and I know you'll agree it's a wonderful collection of togetherness, and I highly commend it. So do please have a look. Anthony's very kindly put up a QR code there so you can get straight onto that, and please do have a look. There's some fabulous stuff there. Thank you, Anthony. So there are lots of resources available from the GA on today's themes, developing countless ideas, I think you would agree, for teaching about these really exciting and engaging topics. So do please have a look at what there is there. Again, there's a QR code linking that, and do use those resources. They're really fabulous. And without further ado, I'll let us get on to the nitty gritty and the crucial bits. But thank you very much for having this space to be able to promote some of the work from the GA. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tess. As Tess said, we'll make a start. So over to Jen to talk to us about her work in school. So thanks, Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Lomas. I am a Year 6 teacher who's currently in the middle of Parents' Evening. I've booked this hour out to do this, so if I'm a bit frazzled, apologies. But I've put my geography brain on now. I am the geography lead and the curriculum lead at my school as well. And I wanted to talk to you about your case studies you might be using for volcanoes and earthquakes. And I can't take credit for the title. Mr. Crooks, wonderful wordsmith, came up with my title all shook up. So thank you, Mr. Crooks. Right, we have the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so a bit of a virtual hands up. Who here learned about Pompeii alongside a bit of history and Italian geography when they were in school? Did we make some pizzas maybe? And who actually forgot the volcano was called Vesuvius? Yeah, definitely been there myself. The thing is, this is still quite often the way into volcanoes in lots of schools currently today, which whilst, yes, you can look at Pompeii and Vesuvius, and we will come back to that in a bit, actually, I think there's a better way to get into teaching volcanoes to your children with more up-to-date case studies. So can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So if you're being really, really honest with yourself, is it time to revamp your volcano and earthquake case studies? If we have a look at why having more recent examples is useful, for a start, if we can have the next slide, it's more relevant, which makes the children more engaged. And I don't know about you, but engaging children can be quite tricky these days, post-COVID attention spans, and especially in the afternoons when we're all tired. Their learning and their knowledge becomes more sticky because it means more to them. They might have seen something in the news about it, they've heard the stories about it, therefore it's going to stick more in their brains. And finally, everyone just has more fun if everyone's engaged and enjoying the topic. And if children have already heard a little bit about it on the news, say, or from, you know, friends or family, then they start to feel like the experts quicker than maybe if it's a really old case study. So next slide, please. Okay, so ways to do this. We could be looking at a few different volcanoes and contrasting and comparing. And there you could look at more historical eruptions and more modern day eruptions, or by focusing on an area such as Iceland and including our case studies here. You might want to do a whole unit around Iceland, and then that's how you get your volcanoes and earthquakes in. So I've got some examples of recent earthquakes. So Cumbre Vieja in the Canary Islands, I'm sure we all remember this one in 2021. This is just the introduction paragraph from a newsround article at the time, which I shared with my year 4 class at the time, I think it was. There were so many amazing videos, news articles that were available to use for this. And the children were seeing it on Newsround every day, and they were really excited, and it was really cool because it was happening now. So if we have a look at the next slide, when it is recent, there are so many more resources like news articles, videos, witness accounts, before and after satellite photos and aerial photos that are available to you, which means you can do so much more with it as well. You can be looking at not just the physical geography of, you know, why is this volcano here, what's happened, but also the human effects of this, which actually, you know, the research does show that the children have more empathy with people closer to home and closer in their timelines. So those children are learning those social emotional skills as well, which I personally think is a huge part of geography. You know, it's not just about the plate tectonics, as much fun as that is. And there you can see a really cool photo of the one in Cumbre Vieja. This website here keeps you up to date about the latest volcanic eruptions in Iceland, which I shall not be trying to pronounce today on a recorded video. But that's also great fun with the kids, trying to learn the names and pronouncing them properly. And then if we have a look at the next website as well, the next slide, this website is awesome. It keeps you up to date with the earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that have happened that day all over the globe. So you can find some up-to-date ones. You can be looking for patterns with the children as well. And you can filter it out as well to have like certain sizes of earthquakes or, you know, volcanic eruptions, certain areas. There's a lot of fun to be had on this website to be making it more relevant. If you are using a scheme and you think, I'm not sure about the case study here, use their activities and just switch it out for a more recent one. That's really easy to do. It's a good jumping off point if you have a scheme, so you can spend more time researching a more recent volcanic eruption or earthquake rather than the task design, which hopefully is okay on your scheme. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once you've got your more up-to-date case studies, there is so much you can do. Obviously, looking at the positive and negative effects on the local people, the tourism, the homes, the land lost. And again, if it's a current study or a current case study, you've got those literal people on video talking about losing their homes. You've got the live videos. Sometimes if it's happening now, you know, you've got those videos. You can see the effects. It's not a, you know, artist's interpretation from Pompeii. There are obviously newspaper articles, news reports. You could have a go. at writing your own news report, a bit of script writing, or a newspaper article. This is very much my year 6 head on and trying to get those pieces of writing for moderation. But, you know, the kids are engaged because it is current and relevant to them. But you can also still do the historical eruptions if you're comparing and contrasting with similar events. You know, how were people affected in the past? How have people adapted now? Let's look at the latest one in Iceland and look at Pompeii. You know, why haven't more people died? The types of volcanoes, the types of eruptions. You can still get those important parts in. You could do some really good mapping of the damage, because now we have lots of aerial photographs, lots of satellite pictures as well. And if you've got a slightly older but more relevant one, here I'm thinking about the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, for example, you could map the recovery there and contrast that with either something that had happened in the past, or a similar event like Hurricane Katrina, and there was an Indonesian earthquake in Lombok a few years ago. Those two come to mind, the Lombok earthquake and the Tohoku earthquake, because I was in both of them. So don't go on holiday with me. But the response in the two different countries was immense. And the ways that they have of dealing with earthquakes and evacuating people. And that could be a really interesting study you could do with the children as well. Next slide, please. So again, that links into the making it personal. You know, does anyone in your school have a personal experience with volcano and earthquake? I have so many children from so many different countries that I'm constantly using them as my sources of knowledge. We have a huge Nepalese contingent randomly where I live in Reading, and that's fantastic because we have a lot of descendants from Sherpas as well, which is just cool. But also you're getting that personal knowledge. They can go home and talk about, you know, the earthquakes in Nepal. Were their family there? How did it affect them? Also obviously links with your mountains topics. And, you know, you can contrast and compare. If they've been in one, have you been in, you know, all those kind of things that have happened. Obviously, if it is personal, like, don't scare the children. Just reminding them, you know, it doesn't happen here. And that obviously whoever went through it survived and they're fine. So I think my biggest takeaway I would want you to take away from this is that sometimes it can be a little bit daunting if it's, you know, today, a relevant case study, but that you're making up because it's not necessarily in a textbook or from your scheme, but actually the rewards you will get from it and the education, the geographical, learning that the children will get from it will be so much more rewarding. And you're instilling that, you know, awe and wonder into the children because it is a modern day event that is happening. And my kids are constantly asking to be looking at the Volcanoes and Earthquakes website to see, you know, where's it happened today? Where's it happened today? Even though in my school, we're now year 6 and they did earthquakes and volcanoes in year 4. So they're still really into it. But yeah, I think that is it. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful.
Yep, thank you, Jen. That was really interesting, and I think particularly thinking about more modern volcanoes and eruptions when we might generally go back to those classic historical ones. But that's really, really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so on to Sally then. Over to you, Sally.
Yes, I'm Sally. I'm a year 6 teacher as well and curriculum lead at my school. So this is just going to be one example of how to incorporate the following aspects of the national curriculum into a unit of work. It builds quite heavily on Jen's advice about using more recent case studies, but also centering the knowledge around a place. So volcanoes and earthquakes are specifically mentioned in physical geography, but if you study specific examples, you can link it to other areas such as locational knowledge of a place and physical and human characteristics. And then you can link it into the human geography elements of resource, trade, land use, as well as all the other things that Jen just mentioned. So my example anchors the theory into place. We look at Iceland because we do feel like this provides more purposeful links elsewhere in the curriculum and also to more purposeful map work. So although our children touch upon the idea of a volcano in year 2, it's not in the Key Stage 1 curriculum at all. There aren't really vocab words that link there. So a bit like Jen, we put it in year 4. it follows year 3 science work on rocks, but that also means they're just a little bit older. So for the, can anybody else see? There's another screen come up. Yeah, don't know. Yeah, so we put it in year 4 because in year 3 they tend to study rocks. So this then lends itself, but equally in year 4 they do states of matter. And so understanding the properties of solids and liquids and the influence of heat tends to help them understand the physics of the volcanoes a little bit better. Also in our school, year 4 focus on Europe. So given we're then going to look at Iceland, it fits. And also by this age, you've probably taught Naples and Pompeii if you've been doing the Romans. So again, there are lots of pockets of knowledge that we can continue to retrieve volcano knowledge from, which works quite well. Yeah. So the next slides just sort of go through what the unit might look like. So when sequencing the unit, I think the 2 pieces of knowledge that you really have to start with are structure of the Earth and the fact that the crust is broken up into tectonic plates and that these plates can move. So they've probably done structure of the Earth when they've done rocks in year 3, so that's often just a bit of a recap. And then we try and get the children to piece it together and reveal it themselves. So we explain what the plates are, and we then get them to plot them on digimaps, which is a great tool for things like this. Iceland is great because you then say to them, okay, which plate is Iceland on? And they get very excited because it's across 2 plates. And then we explain that it's absolutely no coincidence that Iceland is across 2 plates. We then say that the plates move, but we point out to them the fact that the Earth is not shrinking and the Earth is not growing. So if the plates are moving, how might that work? And often, as they're working it through, they start to realize themselves, oh, well, some plates must be colliding and some are probably sinking and others are probably pulling apart, and what's going to happen there? So generally they work it out, and then you say to them, okay, well, in Iceland, the plates are actually moving apart, at which point they then picture, okay, well, if you're removing pressure from a liquid, the liquid's going to rise in between. And then there's a great moment on digimaps where you can then overlay the volcanoes, and Iceland is covered in triangles, and they absolutely love it. And so that's kind of lesson 1. It might be that your evidence for that lesson is kind of just photos and discussion work, but on the next slide you'll see that we do give them a short task where they sort of try and just replicate what they're seeing on digimaps on a map. And I always get them to plot the UK on, or where we live, just again to link it back. So then lesson 2, once they're able to confidently recall that plates are heavy and that they move slowly, they can then start to understand earthquakes. So this is the resource that Jen has already shown. They absolutely love it, and if you show it to begin with, it again, you're recalling all of your plate boundary lines there. Another really good one for earthquakes, for them to understand the theory behind it, even just simply rubbing their hands together, creating friction, it gets them to realize that when things rub together, you've got heat, you've got energy, and then if you get them to press their hands really, really tightly, they realize it's trickier to move, and then when they do move it, they can't control it, it just slips. And then by that point, they're starting to again piece it together. Oh, earthquakes are when this energy gets released. So the lesson itself, on the next slide, just an insight into the sequence. We talk about how earthquakes happen, and we then talk about ways that you could protect against earthquakes. Now, it might be that depending on how much time you've got and depending on how you are sequencing your unit, it might be that you want to save the prediction and the protection for a separate lesson. So you might, at the end of volcanoes and earthquakes, want to do a lesson that's all about hazard management. We kind of integrate it between, but it depends how rushed you are or how much time you have at the end. So it's kind of whatever suits. Fieldwork wise, it's quite a tricky one to get fieldwork into, but I have heard some schools say things like they would do a sketch of their classroom pre-earthquake, and then they might do a sketch of their classroom or their school grounds poster.
Hello.
It might happen. yeah, and also earthquake drills, which obviously they do in Japanese schools. They find that quite exciting. Yeah, we then move on to, in the next lesson, we'll move on to volcanic eruptions. So again, you go straight back to so it'll be on the next slide, I think now. Yeah, so just an insight into the questions, we would get them to consider the sequence. And it does require a bit more recapping later on. But yeah, so the next slide. Again, yeah, this is showing the volcanic eruptions. So there's also on the next slide here there's a really good, it's just the introduction, so it's readily available on YouTube because it's not the whole episode, but there's this introduction, David Attenborough to The Perfect Planet, and it's the volcano episode, and it's just a few minutes long, but it shows the breadth of volcanoes and the breadth of eruptions around the world with the dramatic music, and the kids absolutely love it. It shows underwater volcanoes to show that we can't always see the eruptions, and then they're not always the classic lava spewing things. Yeah, so Iceland is really good for volcanoes because it's literally there because of volcanic action. It confirms to the children that volcanoes are land builders, that they start under the ocean, and then and again bringing new science knowledge, as a liquid cools and solidifies, you're building land, and that is why Iceland is there. If you're teaching to year 4, we find that actually you don't need to water it down. You can literally say the exact science. By that point, they understand liquids and they understand solids. They understand that material that is hot, the particles have got more energy, and if they've got more energy, they're moving apart from each other, so they're less dense and they're more likely to rise. All of these things, year 4 children are more than capable of understanding, so you don't tend to need to water it down. We also managed to talk about effusive and explosive eruptions, because again, they tend to get it. If the lava is sticky, especially having done Pompeii and Vesuvius, they understand that if the lava is sticky, it's going to plug the vents, and then, like if you've got a lid on a bottle of fizzy pop and then you're shaking it, the pressure's going to build until you release that pressure, and then off it goes, and the gas is all there at the top and it's ready to explode. Versus the effusive eruptions in Hawaii, where if it's runny, it's just going to run for a long time, and so you're going to get really flat but large volcanoes. Yeah, so I think next slide, please. So this is an example of the work. We tend to do the sequence of the eruption first before they start labeling the diagram, because to get them to talk about the vents and the layers of magma, until they understand the sequence of eruption, it's hard for them to necessarily picture why would there be layers, why are the layers there, and what is a vent. So until we find it easier to do the sequence first. The next lesson is so the next lesson is a case study. So it's about the impacts of a volcanic eruption, and we start by looking at hazards and defining a hazard, some of which they know because by this point we've read Escape from Pompeii, and we've looked at Mount Vesuvius, and there's great debate that can just be had from that. So you can recap about which of these hazards would be the most dangerous, which would be the easiest to protect against. Does it matter if it's a stratovolcano or a shield volcano to decide whether or not these are worse or not? And then it also ends up, we talk a little bit about prediction and protection, because some of these you could protect against and some of them you absolutely can't. And then the case study that we use is the 2010 Icelandic eruption, and I won't read the name out loud. I say it's a more recent case study. Obviously, it's not as recent as the ones that Jen was mentioning. And absolutely, it's important to put the Iceland map up and have a look at what are the present day eruptions happening at the moment. But where it does work quite well is there is quite a lot of information about it, and you often find that the children can go home and talk to adults, and adults know someone who was affected by this. It's also quite good because there's a good sense of scale. You've got the local impacts, the regional, the national, and the international, and there's often a difference as well. So we play this video, which at first might seem a bit like it's more aimed for older children, but what we do is we have a sheet full of questions, and the children are listening out for specific questions as they go through. But what's really nice about it is it says highlights that you know, Iceland themselves, they actually weren't worried about the ash. The ash, if anything, was a positive because it was going to create fertile land. To them, they were worried about the floods and the ice caps breaking. Whereas in Europe, when we then look at the news reports all over Europe, it's all about the ash cloud because, of course, it halted all flights, and that was annoying for the economy. Again, we can then talk about hazard mitigation, but it will very much depend. You might want to put that into a separate lesson. These are the final 2 lessons. So they only really learn themselves if you're doing an Iceland unit. But again, it's quite nice to do a topic linked into place because it means you can draw out those human geography links a lot more easily than doing an isolated volcano in an isolated place. Physical geography lesson is really quite nice because obviously the children are now looking at Iceland as a place of volcanology and tectonic heat. But then they also know when we look at latitude and we look at the fact it's near the Arctic Circle, they know what that means for climate and environment. So then you sort of just let them puzzle it through and think, well, hang on a second, I've got a really cold country here, but then I've got a heat source below its base. And they start to think, okay, well, what feature is this going to create? So it's quite nice for them to have a look at glacial features and fiery features, and then the ones that are made from both of them. And then for the human geography lesson, as it says there, as you can see, we just, again, draw it all together. The 2010 eruption one talks about tourism. Tourism in Iceland like quadrupled or even more so after that eruption. So this follows on from that, and they look at trade and the economy and various other things that interest them, like language. And we look at geothermal energy as well, which again comes up in year 4 science, and it'll probably come up in other science as well. So it's quite a good link. And then the final slides just go through where else you can bring it in. So we find it lends itself to writing. So we do the How to Train Your Dragon book early on in year 4, and they don't realise it at the time of reading it, but they come to realise that the environment that the book is set in is very Icelandic. And then Escape from Pompeii is great, and we get the children to recreate their own for the 2010 Icelandic eruption. And so if you just click on slightly, you'll see that they are planning their own piece of writing. And again, there's a sense of scale. So there's what's the first inkling that an eruption is happening, and they'll start to talk about tremors, and then you have the eruption sort of come to its peak, and then you have the short-term effects, and then you have the long-term effects. And you can see from their writing that they're really geographical alongside all of their description. You know, you've got these children talking about ash clouds and pyroclastic flows and flash floods in the fjords and all sorts. It's great, and they love it. And then if you were doing volcanology like we are doing, in that we centre it in place, I do sometimes feel a bit like Jen was saying, how, you know, there are so many examples out there and it's forever in the news, and there's so much that you can do. And I sometimes feel because we're centering it in Iceland, we don't quite have time to fully focus on some of the really like separate geography elements. So just some ideas that if you were going to do it this way, what you could do, we revisit in year 5 and year 6, again, through studying place. So in year 5, they look at North America. So we make sure that there's a lesson where they get digimaps out again, and they look at where will volcanoes be in North America and why. So they're restudying their plate tectonics and looking at what the volcanoes will be like. And then in year 6, we look at South America. So in year 6, again, we get digimaps out, we have another recap, and they look at the Andes Mountains as fold mountains where the plates are moving towards each other. And we also get to look at the Ring of Fire at that point as well, which they quite like. And then you can get your Volcano Discovery website out again and have a look at it on there.
Hey, that's brilliant. Thank you, Sally. I think it looks like a really, really good topic to be teaching, and lots of different ideas that people can take away from that. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you ever so much. That's been really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so moving on then to Denise and Thomas, who are going to tell us about primary-secondary collaboration.
Thank you so much. Can I just double check? Thumbs up, you can hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you for I don't want to say allowing us, but inviting us to join GeogLive. This is I feel an interloper because I'm a secondary school teacher, as is Tom. But thank you so much. I'm really enjoying it, and I think the thing that always comes through to me is just how much primary school children already know when they come to secondary school. The things you're talking about and the level you're talking about, we don't remember this, and we often accuse of dumbing things down in year 7, and I'm always reminded. So thank you, because the resources you're sharing, they're really helpful. So thank you. We're going to talk a little bit more about the idea of collaborating between primary and secondary school and geography collaboration. So last year, as GA president, I had a real focus on this. And as part of the work that I was doing, I did a lot of work in primary schools. And I visited quite a few primary schools. And I have to say, it's the absolute highlight of my year. And it's something I'm trying to carry on this year, because I've just absolutely learned so much from working with primary school children and teachers. But not only that, my students have gained so much about that from doing that as well. Sorry. So I'm not going to go into that yet, because we'll talk about that in a moment. But the enrichment that can be gained from a secondary school perspective from working with primary is great. It's a two-way street. So we're going to talk about the collaboration that we've taken part in, myself and Tom, and give you some ideas, but also some ideas for things you might try in the classroom as well if you haven't already done so. So Anthony, next slide, please. Thank you. So as I've said already, there's lots of benefits for it. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I'm not going to read through it all, but there are a lot of benefits from working together and collaborating. And unfortunately, there isn't the time often to do this, but making the time can be a really, really worthwhile exercise. We're going to talk a little bit about hands-on practical workshop that we held. This was in mid-January at one of our local feeder schools. It really dovetailed with the unit of work that they're doing at the moment to do with earthquakes and volcanoes. A bit more about that later. And it was allowing our year 8s and our year 12s to work together, and then the year 8s and the 12s to work with year 3. So really spanning across the age range there as well. Also, the year 8s and the year 12s had just done tectonics. So year 3 was studying it, year 8 had studied it, year 12 had studied it, but all at different levels, and bringing that together was really, really good. We really believe that over time, doing projects like this, and I hope that I can inspire people to do so, can really bring a lot to your schools, and maybe think about what it can bring to your students as well, or children, sorry. Tom, over to you, I think, next. Oh, no, it's not. It's me. Sorry. Next slide. Sorry, Anthony. This is not particularly relevant, but I just thought it might be useful to give you some context on the school in which I work and the school in which my students are coming from when they visit the primary school. So I work in a large secondary school in northeast London, in the London Borough of Redbridge, and this is the school. You can see the City of London in the background. And around this, our school has around 1,800 students in it, ranging from year 7 right up to year 13. But we have lots and lots of feeder schools. I think we have obviously main feeder schools, but they come from around 50 different schools, I think, at the last count. But we have kind of selected maybe 5 or 6 of the main ones, and we've contacted them all. And through contact with those, we've kind of come up with a collaboration with about 3 of them that have been really, really keen for us to work with them on geography events. And they're really appreciative of teachers that they're taking the time to plan with them, but also give them subject updates as well. So that's been really, really great. And that picture was taken in the summer, which makes me think of the summer and nice greenery. Okay, Tom, it is your go now.
Yes, thank you, Denise. So there's lots of different benefits from engagement between primary school pupils and younger pupils, younger students. So these collaborative events really support learning in primary settings. They have benefits for both groups. So in primary, research has shown that this kind of buddying and mentoring support with older year groups can reduce feelings of apprehension and build confidence in those students. It's subject engagement too. So collaborative learning increases student engagement in geography and improves understanding of complex topics as well. And then secondary school children can act as role models, so inspiring younger children for their next kind of step in their academic journeys and their own personal achievements. For secondary pupils, it definitely develops leadership and communication skills. So we found that between our year 8s and our year 12s, taking that responsibility, communicating and organising what they would do in the primary school. And subject knowledge too, so this kind of protege effect, where they are taking lead, running breakout rooms and supporting younger children, deepening their own subject knowledge kind of at the same time. And then empathy too, so engaging with younger children helps them develop confidence in their own abilities, something that isn't always fostered in a secondary school setting, kind of taking lead, learning different needs and different perspectives of other children. And then it's what kind of our pupils would call actually fun. So leaving the school grounds, getting away from kind of the books, and helping kind of those younger children understand something they're very passionate about. So the students we took were our geographical leaders. So they're very keen on geography, and being able to take that outside of their own classroom and share it with younger children was just brilliant fun. Next slide, please. So our workshop focus kind of dovetailed, as Denise said, with the geography module at the primary school, Rocks, Relics and Rumbles. So they do in the latter part of Key Stage 2. So the workshop was led by students from Oaks Park and covered why earthquakes occur, how they're measured, and then how buildings can be constructed to withstand earthquakes. And that happened as kind of a central discussion with 2 year 3 classes, and then broke out into their separate classrooms, where students really kind of took the lead of running a smaller workshop in those breakout rooms. And next slide.
So something that was really, really important to me when I've run these events and run situations where we've visited primary schools, and we have actually hosted a conference with primary school students visiting our school, was to make sure that the geographical leaders, as we call them in my school, are taking the lead and very much planning the session and delivering as much of the content as possible. So this is their slides, and I've been consistently amazed when I give my students the freedom and the encouragement to say, right, you go away and that you take the lead on this. They do it. And I think that at primary school, again, I'm kind of repeating myself, you do so much more of that than we do at secondary school. I think we tend to think they won't do it, they won't do it properly, and we do a lot for them. But in this case, I asked them to make the slides, to plan the session and to run with it. And in this is one of their slides that they did for year 3. I said that you need to think about it. They may not be able to read as much as you can, so you need to have a lot quite visual things and explain what an earthquake is. And this is what the year 8s came up with. I also had them come to me and say they'd like to do quizzes with them, they'd like to do some AFL techniques with them, and they did, and it was absolutely fantastic. And as Tom said, this was in the hall with all of them before they went into breakout rooms, which Tom will explain a little bit more about now. So next slide, please.
So we started off in the main hall, where there was a bit of kind of teacher explanation, as it were, led by the geographical leaders. So the visible and tangible elements of geography are one of the kind of greatest strengths of our subject. And it's really useful to share that and to visualize that in demonstrations, to provide that stimulus for learning and reinforce how this applies in the real world. So to make these earthquakes more tangible, we had the primary school students, they were encouraged to make their own earthquakes. So we had a hand seismograph app on a visualizer, and then the geographical leaders encouraged all the students to jump up and down in the hall, making the floor shake, which in turn made our kind of seismograph jump up and down, which is really interesting. And the students absolutely loved it. So after their kind of first time jumping, it's almost kind of hard to make them stop. They really, really loved it, and really made that connection between what they've been told about how the plates move, and the impacts of earthquakes, kind of those outcomes, and that process itself. So making this graph they've seen previously actually move for themselves was really brilliant, and so fun to kind of see that learning moment take hold in front of you. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I can say that the app is well worth it. It's fantastic. So then that was Tom's idea. Thank you. Just another thing is, I think we often talk about earthquake-proof buildings, which is a really important part of the workshop, but I don't think we perhaps talk enough about real examples. So the Transamerica Pyramid is always one that comes to mind. But actually, when I looked into it and my students helped me and we researched some earthquake-proof buildings around the world, there were some really, really examples. And so before we went out to our breakout groups, we talked about some of these, and we talked about what made them earthquake proof and some of the shapes and the idea of building in a pyramid, etc., and why that may be stronger for withstanding an earthquake. And this was just one of the slides that I used. Next slide, please. And we also showed them this, which we were then leading into, and Tom's going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but leading into the workshop challenge, which was for them to build an earthquake-proof building. So this was just another slide that we showed the class, or the two classes that were with us, and we gave them some ideas on how they may do that. And we were trying to link the very basic model there to the actual real buildings that you can see in the other slide. Next slide, please.
So having discussed earthquakes, earthquake-proof buildings and different techniques for that, led by the geographical leaders, and then jumping to simulate our own earthquake on the visualizer, we went into the separate classrooms. So the class teachers took their class and then 6 of the geographical leaders with them into these breakout rooms, which are run by the Oaks Park students. So together in groups of kind of 5 students-ish, slightly less in some of the cases, they built their own buildings using kind of hard spaghetti sticks and mixture of large and small marshmallows. So the students had complete control over how they built their buildings. So very kind of children-led in that sense, with geographical leaders facilitating that and asking these probing questions. It's really good to kind of listen in and hear what they were discussing with the children to test kind of their knowledge and their understanding, and linking it back to relics, rocks and rumbles. So bringing the knowledge the students had, applying it in this case. So there were a really wide variety of different buildings between our 2 rooms. So I was in one room, Denise was in the other. And the approach was fantastic, really individual. And also that brilliant kind of communication and group work amongst the primary children, and then between the different geographical leaders as they kind of egged their teams on to make the best buildings they could. At the end of the session, they then shook the tables. So had 2 geographical leaders on each side of the table, shaking it to see how long those buildings would last and the kind of intensity of the earthquakes they would withstand. Once we'd done that, we had a quick chat at the end about how their different building styles had affected the success of their buildings, linking it back to what Denise had run just before about the shapes of buildings and how different countries make different types of earthquake-proof buildings, although not all countries can achieve that. Again, there's really strong learning moments linking to what they'd done before in their own curriculum to what we had linked to early in the afternoon with our workshop. And next slide, please. And the feedback was fantastic. So we got one of the quotes here. I learned that the closer you are to tectonic plates, the more you'll feel the rumble of earthquakes. And that's why countries that are nearby are also affected by earthquakes. So really understanding that spatiality, the kind of spatial nature of these phenomena. The primary school students really enjoyed working in their groups. So being in their classroom kind of groups away from that larger start of the workshop helped their design process. So that communication they had complete control of. And it linked their classroom-based learning to the start of the workshop and then to hands-on activities, really putting that into motion. And we've got an audio clip here of the students talking through that at the end of the workshop.
What did you guys enjoy about making the buildings?
I enjoyed because it was really fun and I like doing creative things. I liked how we build the buildings because we get to be creative and use our own ideas to and only had marshmallows and spaghetti to survive an earthquake. I liked it to use our creativity.
Just so rewarding listening to that at the very end. It was fantastic fun. The primary school children also, so they learnt more about earthquakes and plate tectonics. It linked to what they had done early on in the curriculum in previous years. We got a clip of that as well.
What have you learnt about earthquakes whilst making the buildings?
I learned that most of the earthquake-proof buildings are in a pyramid shape because I think that helps it stay balanced and it doesn't fall over when the earthquake happens. I learned that you cannot use too much materials or else it might collapse.
Very to rate the workshop out of 10, and you'll see we got some very varied responses. Some saying how much they enjoyed the task that we presented to them, how much they enjoyed working with our geographical leaders, although some wanted a written component, which you'll hear in just a second.
Out of 10, how much fun did you guys have?
10. 13.
Ooh, lots and lots of fun.
9. 0 because I wanted to learn more. 20.
20?
Maybe 30.
Maybe 30?
I'd probably say 70.
17?
100.
100?
-1.
-1? Why -1?
Because I wanted to make it more sturdy, and it was too much activity. I wanted to do more like writing and stuff.
More writing. We can definitely arrange that for next time.
50.
Next slide, please.
That'll be about the last time they say they want more writing. By the time they're 13, they'll be begging to make marshmallow buildings again. I just loved hearing that. It was fantastic. And something that was really important was obviously you could hear Tom talking to them at the end there, but hopefully you noticed that it was the geographical leaders that were asking the questions. So they were asked to think of questions and to interview the pupils as well. And then I think for me, the best part of this whole experience was the minibus ride back to our school. I mean, it was 5 minutes tops. And my students, bear in mind, I had a 6 year 12s who were a little bit reticent and a little bit like, what are we doing? They literally were just absolutely, I don't say this lightly because it's not really my terminology, but they were buzzing the whole way back to our school. They were talking about it. They were debating who'd done the best. They were talking about the buildings. And as the quote, we kind of take us back to the start of our presentation. It was actually fun. I think they said it's actually really good fun. Can we go back? So it was fantastic. I won't read all this out because it's on the screen and you can have a look at it. But they really enjoyed presenting. And what I loved was seeing them have ideas, suggestions for me, and seeing 2 year 8s leading true or false quizzes to check understanding of earthquakes. It was an absolute highlight. So hopefully we've inspired some thoughts there, not just about collaboration between primary and secondary school, but also what you might do in the classroom to bring earthquakes to life as well. The only thing I would say is that the marshmallows are very sticky, so don't cut them in half like I did, because it was a nightmare to keep them whole. Anyway, thank you so much for allowing us to come and speak about this, and we've really, really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you both very much. I think that's it's always really positive to hear about that collaboration between primary and secondary, and lots of learning obviously happened, as we heard from the children. And I think sometimes when they're doing more creative things, they don't think they're learning, but I bet they can remember what they did. So those who were saying -1, I think they probably learned a lot more than they were thinking. But thank you ever so much. That's been really interesting, and lots of different ideas again to take on and for people to take away with them. So thank you ever so much for coming with us. So are there any questions in the chat that have come up for any of our presenters?
Not that I can see at the moment, Kate.
I know there's been a lot of what a great idea and thank yous coming up in the chat. So if you haven't had a look at the chat, particularly our presenters, please do, because there's a lot of appreciation being shown in there as well. So yeah, just a reminder then, just to finish off, that we do have a whole range of different GeogLives. As you'll know, this is GeogLive 25. So there are 24 hours of free CPD on YouTube, so please do go and have a look. There's lots of ideas over the past few years, lots of different topics, so please do go and have a look and see what you can take away into your own classrooms. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, quick question.
Oh yes, sorry.
Sorry, just really quickly, there's some fantastic ideas here, and absolutely love it if you're happy to write some articles for primary geography, because we don't have enough on physical geography often, and these are just absolutely wonderful examples that we'd love to put in, and yeah, just such a variety and everything in such different creative ways of getting all of this across. So we'd love to hear from you. That would be brilliant. I'm going to put my my email address in the chat if that's okay. But thank you all so much. That's been really inspiring.
Thank you, Tess. So yep, please do. And that for anybody, if you're interested in writing for primary geography, please do get in touch with Tess. And hopefully see people at conference in a couple of weeks now, just over a month. So hopefully see some people there. So thank you very much.